We're back for the next in our series of investigations of the early Benny Goodman Orchestra recordings with a focus on the band. This is not a discographical series. There are folks who do that a lot better than we do, and we will leave that to those folks with the dates, the specific dates, and all the data. We're focusing on the music through the vantage point of the rhythm section. The great George Van Epps on the guitar. The drummer at the beginning of the band was Sammy Weiss, and then we're going to transition very shortly into Gene Krupa. So I'm joined by two of my colleagues, both superb musicians, but also folks who have really spent decades investigating the specific genre and idioms of the day, and that's Hal Smith and Nick Rossi. So as we continue, gents, we're going to start with the music. Just to recap real quick, we began with the August 16th, 1934, Benny Goodman and his Music Hall Orchestra date. We went from there to a session that they did under the pseudonyms of Vincent Rose and the Modernists, September 11th, 1934. Then we dabbled for a moment on October 16th, 1934, with the tune Stars, to try and figure out exactly who is on that record day. We're never exactly sure whether it was the all-star band that Goodman was going to take to England or whether it was some combination, and we had some very interesting thoughts about that. And now we're going to jump to November 14th, 1934, and this is another one of these pseudonym dates. However, this was a series of recordings that were well known at the time. Harry Rosenthal and his orchestra, and that's the name of the group. Helen Ward recorded with them shortly before and after. There go the discographers right there. He recorded another session under that name, and this I will edit out because this is just a fucking mess, and there's no reason for me to get into that. Okay. Harry Rosenthal and his orchestra, and it's a session recorded on November 14th, 1934. There's more than one session issued under Harry Rosenthal's name, one of which was thought to contain Benny Goodman. It turns out it was Slats Long on the clarinet. This one is definitely Benny Goodman, and we're going to assume that members of his band are on it. D. Russ Connor, the George Washington of Benny Goodman discographers, thought that it might very well be musicians from his own band, so we'll listen to it and talk about what we hear. Why don't we just leave it like that? November 14th, 1934, two titles, Say When and When Love Comes Swinging Along.
maybes, your heart stops and goes. The world's full of babies with arrows and bows. When love comes swinging along, each kiss is a tonic, you don't mind the rain. There's something symphonic in any old strain. When love comes swinging along, you sing, it's spring, you've never seen the sky so sunny before. And you're quite sure if it's not paradise, it must be next door. You're light as a feather, you're walking on air. So whether the weather is cloudy or fair, you can't go wrong when love comes swinging along.
I'll tell you something I love about that session. November 14th, 1934, Harry Rosenthal and his orchestra. No trumpets, but trombones, saxes, strings, harp, and all that kind of stuff. It really helps us place in context what made the Goodman band sound as it was evolving kind of so special, because that's the kind of music that most dance bands played. That's what they played on the radio. That's what they played in the hotels. And except for Casa Loma and maybe Joe Hames and a few of the hot white bands of the time, this was standard fare. And I think that's very important when we study these recordings, that people understand that even the jazz records of 1934, 35, when you compare them with everything else, they sound like John Coltrane, compared to the context of the time. And that's very important to remember. So here, obviously, a commercial record date. I'll just start the comments by saying that the string section is not that great. I mean, not to cast aspersions, but it doesn't sound like first chair players. That's all I can say. The arrangements are stockish, and save for Goodman on the second track where he plays that short clarinet solo, there's really very little of jazz interest on them. On the first, he does that subtone commercial clarinet style that was very popular at the time. But to take it to Hal and to Nick, what did you get from listening to the rhythm section? Nick?
I thought they were struggling a little bit on that one. Without Claude Thornhill, it sounded like it wasn't as sure-footed as it had been. I think Van Epps and Harry Goodman and Sammy Weiss probably looked at each other and just kind of nodded and said, let's play to each other. Because it sounded to me like Fulton McGrath was ahead of them on both of those takes. And they were just playing real simple to keep it under wraps. And Van Epps was coming to the fore a little bit, really, really playing hard. It sounded like, to me, in a good way. That was a good thing. Also sounded like maybe the drums had been moved back farther away from the microphone. It was a little harder to hear him, but Sammy Weiss was just playing 4-beat brushes, basically just playing time like the guitar. That was the right thing to do. And Harry Goodman sounded just as good as on the previous sessions, really, really laying down that great beat. So those three guys were really, I think they were having a little bit of a difficult time, but they didn't sound like they were having a difficult time. They were doing their job. That's what I heard.
Yeah, I agree with you, Hal. I think this might be the most, I won't say strained, but the most aggressive we've heard Van Epps as of yet. He's definitely, there's a little more snap, there's a little more definition in terms of we are right here at all times. which just isn't really characteristic of his style. I mean, it's something that we'll hear later with Alan Roos. But with George, as I've talked about before, George definitely had this more relaxed, even approach to things. It's not that it's bad, like you said. I think it was a matter of looking at the date and just doing what needed to be done. I love the bass, though. It was nice to have Harry Goodman back. I thought that was rhythmically the most kind of interesting in terms of just the qualities of his notes were really beautiful. Again, those nice woody whole, big beats, which I enjoyed. To be honest with you, it took me a while. That first track, I won't say it could have been anybody, but it could have been any good dance band guitar player to some extent. It was only on the second track and near the end that I was like, okay, that's almost certainly George. There's a harmonic imprint. In fact, we get a nice couple chords at the very end of that second track that point directly to George. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, Hal. It was just putting in the time and keeping time.
Yeah. We now turn to a session of November 26, 1934, and it's interesting because it's the first Goodman session after the gig at the Music Hall had ended. And when you read Goodman's autobiography, purported autobiography as told to, and also, the wonderful Ross Firestone book, and of course Russ Connor's books continue to be the Bible for all Goodman researchers. It was kind of an uncertain period. They were doing pickup dates here and there. The audition for the NBC Let's Dance broadcast was just around this time period. And that's one thing, again, that makes this stuff so fascinating, is that it's unknown what the future is. And when you listen to the recordings in that context, no, they didn't know that Sing 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 was going to happen, or the Paramount Theater, or Teddy Wilson, or any of those things. So let's go to the music, and then we'll get right into the commentary. Let's hear the first track, arranged by George Bassman, and this is "I'm 100% for You," and it's the debut of Helen Ward in the band on disc. All right.
Love for you wasn't true, so I'm advertising that all of me is 100% for you. 98% no sir, 99% no sir, gonna be content, yes sir, satisfied with you by my side. You're the only one who can boss my heart, you're the only one who will do. Honestly and truly and cross my heart, I'm 100% for you.
gosh, that's a nice preview of what's about to come in a couple of years, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a difference when they've got some jazzy material to play to. That band really came alive, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, there was some personnel changes, and in Russ Connor's book, he mentions that the personnel is in, there are no personnel records. So it's a matter of piecing together what was in the press at the time. I should give the personnel, even though our viewers saw it. And what I'm doing in these 4-session dates that we do, I'm putting the personnel up while we play the first track, and assuming that they can remember it, and you can always back and forth. But the personnel is thought to be Jerry Neary, possibly a trumpet player named Art Sylvester, but Pee Wee Irwin. And that's a major addition to the band. On trumpets, again, Jack Lacey on first and solo trombone, Red Ballard on second trombone. Toots Mondello's in the band now. So we have Toots Mondello and Jaime Schertzer, Art Rollini and someone else on tenor. And now Frank Froba is in the band. And he's going to be heard to good advantage here. Frank Froba, George Van Epps, Harry Goodman, and Sammy Weiss. Can you talk about the drumming, Hal? What did you hear from Sammy?
Well, two things. Sounded like he was either a little closer to the microphone that time, or he was really enjoying playing that kind of material. It was a lot easier to hear him than the previous couple of sessions. He was playing very nice, crisp press rolls, and crash cymbal sounded like that's what was written in the arrangement. That doesn't sound like something a jazz drummer would have put in at those points. But playing beautiful, beautiful time, probably 2-beat on the bass drum and the rolls, and he increased his intensity towards the end of the song, and certainly behind Benny's solo. And it's kind of what's to come with Gene Krupa in just a little while. Very similar kind of playing, I think.
Well, I'll tell you, I think this record is a step forward in a lot of ways. Certainly from the last session we listened to. I'll start with kind of my dimmer view of the rhythm section, which is I'm not a huge fan of Froba on this recording in particular, and I'll tell you why. I feel like there's a little bit too much rhythm negotiation going on at the first half of the record. And I think what's going on after listening to this record several times is I think Froba's tendency is to double a lot of what the other rhythm instruments are playing. I hear him doubling some of the bass notes. So it gets this slight kind of echo effect that's not necessarily that kind of bouncy give and take that you hear typically between a bass and a guitar, and certainly between a really good swing era piano player and a rhythm section. It's interesting, like when the split chorus that Benny takes kicks in, there's a massive shift in the rhythm section. And we've heard it before. We've heard that same kind of straightening out of time to emphasize the kind of drive of Benny's solo, or to support the drive of Benny's solo. But it's funny. It's like Harry and George kind of took control of the beat at that point in time and wrestled it away from Frank. At least that's what I'm hearing. Again, it's frustrating as a Van Epps fan, and just I'm hearing less of what makes him interesting to me on this record. Although the time, again, it's good time. Harry sounds great. It's if anything, re-listening to these records is making me, more and more of a Harry Goodman fan. So, but yeah, I think overall, to echo what Hal said, it's great to hear this material. It's great to hear Helen Ward. The George Bassman arrangement is interesting because, he had worked with Fletcher Henderson early on. So there's a Fletcher Henderson connection there. And I think this is around the time that Bassman, or that Chick Webb bought an armload of arrangements from Bassman. So he's just kind of an interesting character to throw into the mix and hear some more of his work historically, because he was working with the black bands and the good ones at the time. And here's Benny using one of his arrangements in this kind of murky period that we don't know a lot about historically as far as Goodman's concerned.
Yeah, when you listen to the 34 Henderson records, he's recording Will Hudson things. And
Yeah.
again, I think that the publishers had a lot to do with that. So I think Irving Mills and all those folks. And there was a lot of influence. And when you look at the trades from that year, the trade magazines, I mean, there's so much talk about the publishers. You know what I mean? Much more than in later years. So that's a fascinating point. There's a certain clipped quality to the arrangement. And then as we've all noted, when Benny comes in, it's kind of like the sky clears and you have like a bona fide great jazz moment. And I think, again, that's something that in Benny's mind, even at this point, like when he doesn't know what's going to happen. I mean, he's one of a million people making records, and it was not pre-anointed, that this was going to happen for him. That nonetheless, he was having these, I mean, there's no greater jazz clarinet player. There's save Louis Armstrong and a few other people. I don't think there's any better jazz players in 1934 than Benny Goodman. So he's putting on all these records, these little dots of real jazz quality, no matter what the context is. And it'd be fascinating to see how this plays out. Helen Ward. So, in preparation for this, I listened to the Helen Ward tracks on the other Harry Rosenthal date that's not Goodman. And she sounds, as a straight commercial singer, she sounds like one of many. I'm not sure that I would listen to her singing the straight commercial stuff and say, oh, wow, she's really great. But when she gets with Benny, she has that time and she has that phrasing and that breathing that is, so interesting. I'd like to hear more about Helen Ward from you guys when we get to her next time on the next session. Let's go to the next track. This is Kokey, Kokey.
That was great. That was great music. It's funny. I think this was one of the tunes, if I'm not mistaken, that Benny later specifically mentioned was in the band book when they auditioned for Let's Dance, and it's a really interesting tune. It's very much of its time, but also very clearly sounds like this is Benny Goodman, at least to my ears. And it reminds me of some of those Ellington and Fletcher Henderson tunes where you kind of don't know where it's headed, in a good way. You know, it's not predictable in terms of where this tune's going. Again, I think Harry Goodman is kind of the shining light of the shining star of the rhythm section this time around. He's nice and full. He's solid. He's got a great beat. George is right there with him, keeping great time. No faults at all. Not a lot that really says, this is George Van Epps, apart from very fine guitar playing, which is, an art in and of itself. Frank Freba didn't bug me this time around, so I won't disparage him.
He has nice things to say about you.
Oh, poor Frank.
Yeah. Well,
he did okay.
Listen, he's a great pianist. It's a
Yes.
matter of the context. But I'll differ with you. I mean, I to me, there's something so dated about it, and this arrangement, and I differ with you there. About it sounding like Things to Come or something like that. I think it's to my ears, it sounds more like the kind of thing that he got the hell away from. But maybe you're talking even more about the performance of it, because the performance of it is absolutely things to come. But that's one. I mean, it's such a strange piece, with these repeated sections and then the solo coming in. It's weird. I looked for anything in contemporary press about it, and all I can find so far are just record reviews of this session that mention it. But, I thought like maybe it was a piece that was well known. Now, Cab Calloway frequently at this time would talk about people who were cokey. And he would even go, he would do that in the big broadcast of 1932. I mean, cocaine was something that was very much around at that time. I just wonder whether the title refers to that. Hal? No, I don't know. Wait.
I thought.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant like,
I'm no expert.
Right.
No, I thought the same thing. That must be what that refers to. I'm wondering who the arranger is, because there's no arranger listed in honor. It sounds a little bit like Will Hudson.
Yes.
An up-tempo Casa Loma kind of thing. And as you said, what a bizarre composition. It's sort of like Harry Dial's Poison or Earl Hines' Blue Night, or one of those things that doesn't go where you think it's going to go. It starts to, and then it's a little bit like Raymond Scott's Powerhouse too.
Oh,
It's definitely dated. It's not You're a Heavenly Thing or I'd Do Anything for You. But how interesting that was, and what a bright tempo. That's what makes me think it might be a Will Hudson arrangement, because those tended to be really bright. And Sammy Weiss playing really nice roles there, a little bit like Stan King had played and is going to play briefly on some air shots with Goodman after Sammy Weiss leaves the band. But he also sounded like he's just trying to keep his head above water at that tempo. There's not a lot you can do when it's that fast. You can't play a lot of fills and turnarounds and things. I think he was just probably watching Harry Goodman's hands and George Van Epps' hands and just trying to lock in with him.
Yeah. He
played great, wonderful time, but at that tempo, there's just not a lot of messing around you can do.
Yeah. That's your comment about Raymond Scott. I'd never put that together, but yes, absolutely. You can hear that powerhouse and so many things like that. Yeah.
I'm gonna dig myself in even deeper now. The intro figure instantly reminded me of the John Kirby group. that descending thing. And I'm going to retract my answer slightly. I do think the main theme is probably the most dated part of the piece. I think once they get beyond the main theme, which of course they go back to, I'm going to stand by. I still think it's really interesting music, and there's a lot of hints at what we're going to hear later on in Benny's career. To my ears.
Yeah, well, again, as we've talked about, nothing's more boring than hearing three people agree all the time, right? I mean, Jesus. Okay, wait a minute. All right. Now we go to a fascinating one because there's something, slight little reference to something that we will hear a lot of in Benny's future here. This is Like a Bolt from the Blue. The vocalist is Buddy Clark. Again, you know, someone who's not talked about that much, but who, given the context of the times, was a very hip singer. So Buddy Clark, arranged by Jiggs Noble, Like a Bolt from the Blue.
Up above, sweet was the wonder of love. Then came the thunder of love, just like a bolt from the blue. Gone was the dream that I dreamed, gone was the love light that gleamed. Each word you said to me seemed just like a bolt from the blue. I saw happiness dawning in my fool's paradise. Then without any warning, you woke my heart, broke my heart. There was no cloud in the sky, there was no tear in your eye. I heard you saying goodbye, just like a bolt from the blue.
Like a Bolt from the Blue, you know, a fascinating performance on so many different levels, just to talk about. First of all, like, you know, it still has that hotel bandish quality to it, or let's just say commercial element that was going to be gone from Goodman the moment he went to Victor Records. I mean, that's a thing that's gone like an old bolt of the blue. That bolted, you know. But what I really enjoy about it is, you know, the quality of the musicianship. Just the players and how they play. Now, I keep thinking about Red Ballard because The trombones have ya da 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 da, a beautiful lead trombone. I'm assuming by Jack Lacey, because I've read incontrovertibly that Red Ballard always played second trombone. He's the world's greatest second trombone player. But when you listen to him play the melody in the background, there's this little moving second trombone part, and if that's not carried off perfectly, then everything collapses. So just that for starters. Second, or B, the recording balance. The balance of the rhythm section, the muted trumpets, the open trombones, the saxophone section, stuff like that doesn't happen by accident. That's just not just a band set up and put up one mic. That's the result of a lot of work. And again, when Benny comes in, he plays that bridge, but he goes da 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 da, or whatever those intervals are, which I just mangled. But those last two notes on that bridge, they're so full of music that even by playing a written melody on a commercial chart, Goodman can bring to it, like Armstrong could, or any number of great artists could just bring even to something that basic, a beautiful moment of music. Mentioned that Buddy Clark was a very hip vocalist. There he's singing in a very commercial vein. But when we get to him on the early I'm Living in a Great Big Way and all that kind of stuff, then he's really kind of swinging more. So those are just some opening comments. Can we talk about the guitar? And I have a question for you, Nick. In terms of the tone of the guitar, how would you describe the tone quality of Van Eps's acoustic playing, and let's compare it to the tone of Alan Roos, just since he's going to come next. Is there something individual about their sounds, even forgetting about what they played, but their
definitely, and it's I might as well crack the seal now, since we're kind of comparing the two. Roos was Van Ep's student, and George called him his prize pupil. So in spite of their differences, he's coming out of the Van Ep's tradition, not only in terms of what he plays, but how he approaches the music to a very large extent. And that's not a criticism of Alan in any capacity. But the main tonal difference is one more of attack. Alan has this crisp snap, almost like if you think of the kind of drum sounds like closer to a snare drum, and it's the way you do that is a little bit more of aggressive of a strum, as well as where you strike the strings, between the neck and the bridge of the guitar. George is definitely more laid back. I've talked about his kind of even approach before. He also just has a less of an aggressive attack on the notes. And if you attack the strings with less velocity, it produces a mellower sound. Extreme is like it's a soft strum to a thwack, to add very non-technical terms to it. But you hear a bit of it. I mean, George is not, and this is a pretty good example. Again, going back to George's technique book, he had kind of idealized where to hit the strings on the guitar. I mean, he'd thought about these things, and he kind of has this midpoint. So not as soft as some players from the era, and certainly not as crisp as Alan.
Oh, yeah. Hal, what did you hear of interest?
Nick mentioned aggressive guitar playing. I thought, you may disagree with me, I thought that was pretty aggressive playing by George Van Epps and Harry Goodman and Sammy Weiss on that. Like, let's take this beyond a dance band kind of feel and make it go. And I liked that. It didn't destroy the overall feeling, but it gave it a real pulse that other dance bands were not getting at that point in time. And I think Frank Frobo was pretty much neutralized there, just playing boom chuck, boom chuck, boom chuck, no little no fills above the band like Earl Hines would have played, or as Jeff Stacey was going to play in the future. but that rhythm section really took care of business and made that side go. I really liked what they did.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Hal. And yeah, you bring out a good point. George is definitely playing more aggressive than we've heard him on other sides, for example. Although we've heard a little bit of aggression, and I mean that in a very simple kind of technical way, of course. I think going back to kind of this idea of balance in the recording studio, I think by the third tune they've really found a nice. I would suspect they would have moved people around slightly in between tunes, but it's like by this track, like everyone's where they should be, playing with the right amount of kind of aggression, velocity, attack, for sure.
What does aggression mean in this context to you guys? Because that's a word that I'm hearing a lot, and I'm not exactly sure what it means because it tends to have a pejorative meaning. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean in this context?
In a time perspective, just how on top of that beat you're playing. Right on top of it, pushing the envelope of pushing the beat forward a little bit, and it's, which of course you don't want to be doing, but just right on top of it. And from a guitar standpoint, it's again, like the degree of velocity that you're hitting the strings with. Mm-hmm. And it's funny. It's another thing George talked about. His technique was the strum was as if you were shaking your hands off after you've washed your hands and you're shaking it off with water. He felt that was the proper way to strum to hit a string. So it's like this kind of snap, not quite the same sort of technique that you'd use for a banjo. It's similar. It's coming from there most likely, but it's this kind of, wringing your hands out. So it's the degree of which you're showing aggression in that activity.
I was thinking of it as kind of a forward momentum that dance bands didn't have. And even with the drumming, Sammy Weiss was playing brushes all the way through that as far as I could hear, but he was playing the brushes like they were press rolls. And with a forward momentum, not a big wash or wave across the drum. It was a shorter tap, and I hear a shorter string ring on the guitar and a shorter string ring on the bass. Just made everything move.
It's funny, when you talk about that kind of time feel, I immediately think of Kenny Clark's Ride Cymbal Beat. Which always had that feeling of, it's one of those magical things that drummers talk about, but it had, you felt like he's rushing. He's not. But now we had hand wringing from washing hands, which is a very 2020 kind of thing. I'll go back to the 19th century. I think it's almost kind of like, whoa, Nelly. In other words, he's at this point where you almost have to pull the horses back from racing or going ahead. Kind of, it's that thing. It's at that moment of surging. Really, really interesting. And again, that's one thing that I'm enjoying so much about this series is that not only are we way back almost 90 years ago in music, but we're talking about musical qualities and about certain essences of things, that relate when people might be watching this, long after, we're up talking with George Van Epps and Sammy Weiss about it. So what was that record day? How was Benny back then?
Right. And he's telling us everything we said was wrong.
Right. All right, let's go to the last tune from the record. Have to remark upon ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. That transition in the arrangement that sounds like goodbye, and a lot of people have noticed that there's that little hint of goodbye. Now, goodbye doesn't show up on a Goodman recording or broadcast until much later, well into 1935. However, there is a broadcast from the Music Hall in 1934, and he's already using goodbye as an in and out theme at that point. So, as opposed to thinking that maybe, it was a little blip in this arrangement and they took it. We see that, but this is where the hypothetical stuff just takes us nowhere, because you say, well, maybe this arrangement was written for Benny before and then he liked it and then he asked someone to develop it into a theme song, as opposed to that Jiggs Noble or whomever knew that it was Benny's theme song, so why not throw it in? If we live long enough to get to Camel Hop in 1937, there's I hear sing, sing, sing in there. You know what I mean? And but as I say, that's a discussion for another time. Let's go to the Music Hall Rag, the fourth title from this session.
That's that kind of tempo is not fun to play. My hats off to those guys for keeping that time. They didn't wobble at all. That was amazing. Press rolls all the way through, real clean, real tight, very nicely played. Sure, he was playing 2/4 on the bass drum, and Harry Goodman playing really solid 2-beat on the bass. I couldn't hear George Van Epps very well. I'm sure he was right in there, maybe accenting the afterbeat a little bit just to give his wrist a rest. I'm sure Nick can talk about that. I wish I hadn't heard Frank Proba and his quote, but I recognized the tune finally, and I know that's going to become one of Benny's favorites to play in the years to come. And I always think about that version with Jess Stacy and Sid Weiss and Maury Feld and Sweet and Lowdown when it's under its real title. But this was just a little too fast for everybody's comfort except Benny. he was right there. It didn't bother him at all. But I know when he was more in control of things, he would have slowed that tempo down just a little bit just to make it swing. And of course, he had guys in the band who had no problem making things swing. But it's amazing that he played all those wonderful, genius phrases at that tempo. To me, I don't know how he did it.
It's funny, you know. It even with his first entrance, it seems like this is a Louis Armstrong piece. I mean, this is the super fast thing, and the soloist comes in, you know, in halftime, which he kind of does, and then he gets busier and busier and crazier, more virtuosic. I don't think there's any. I can't think of any other precedents except, you know, Louis' Tiger Rag and records like that by 1934, featuring a which is later, right, which is you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I guess that's the kind of thing, like, you know, like where Benny could have played forever. But yeah, what a great record. Nick, did you hear?
He could have played forever, and the rhythm section would have resented him forever. My favorite thing about this record by far is Benny. It's and, you know, it's his band, and that's the primary reason we're here. So it's great to hear him playing like this, you know, at this tempo. But I'm with Hal. It's definitely just like a hang on to the beat kind of performance from the rhythm section, and they do well. And I disagree with Hal. There was one little place I heard them slightly faltering in tempo, and I'd have to go back. And point out exactly where. There's a little bit of wobble, which I think is, frankly, to be expected at a tempo like this. You know, to Hal's point, yeah, Harry's right in there on the ones and threes. There's heavy backbeat, which we've talked a little bit about before. I'm hearing heavy backbeat on the guitar. So, you know, George is emphasizing 2 and 4. He's most likely playing all 4 quarter notes in each bar, but kind of ghosting almost that 1 and 3 underneath the bass, and laying back really hard on the 2 and 4. Playing much more aggressively on the 2 and 4 than we've heard him play, kind of out of just function and necessity to keep that moving forward and keep that time nice and exact. I heard a little bit more of those kind of crossover points that I was hearing on the first side with the piano. Again, the piano kind of ghosting or doubling some of the bass notes, which I don't think is necessarily a plus in this case. And even during the piano solo, you know, it's interesting. A lot of records on which, even from this time, the early records in which Teddy Wilson plays, you know, the guitar sometimes will drop out entirely when Teddy Wilson's taken a solo. And I think that's partly to accommodate the piano player's preferred style of soloing. And that might have been an attribute this time if George laid out during the piano solo. But, you know, that's I'm sticking my neck out pretty far at that point in time.
Well, you know, and also with laying out when Teddy played and stuff like that, I think it was also for the harmonic freedom. That, yes. You know, especially Teddy was known for his superimposition of certain kind of chords that were beyond the ken of what a guitar player would play. Yeah. All right. Well, we have concluded. We should mention the trombone soloist was Jack Lacey. And again, the first time that we've heard a saxophone section led by Toots Mondello, and they sound really, really wonderful. Pee Wee Irwin, as we mentioned before, is on the record date. And this is quite a moment because it's just a couple of days later. The first broadcast for the Let's Dance series is on Saturday, December 1st. And this is November 26th. So they're heading right towards that moment. That's going to be the definitive moment. Absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Hal. We'll pick up with our next session.
Thanks, Loren.